those kind of things to start out with, and we'll go on.
Kim, you've probably known me 35 years. I'll tell you something you don't know. My mother was an adult probation officer for Harris County, Texas.
Really?
Now, I didn't think much about that until I found her badge a few months ago when I was going through family things, as we all do. And I remembered that she had emphasized to me when I was a baby lawyer that she understood because she had been a probation officer. So my parents were raised and married in the Depression. I guess that tells you how old I am. My mother went to college when she was 16 and graduated when she was 18 because she had to work to get through school in order to earn money so her younger two sisters could go to college. And my father didn't go to college, but like my mother, she was interested in helping those less fortunate. So they were very, very liberal at a time when it was maybe not so cool or popular. I have been referred to more than once as a red diaper baby. And I think that has something to do with my lifelong issues with authority. My mother said that there were only two things I couldn't ask her. Was she ever a member of the Communist Party, and was she a virgin when she married my father? So now,
to say that.
now we're all liberated people, and we can tell that story at least among people that we know. So as they moved to Houston to find work, my father was crippled in his feet and he couldn't serve in the military. He was crippled while he was in the Army cavalry. At a time they actually had horses, but he never rode a horse outside the state of Texas. And he became crippled, and so he had special shoes and couldn't move around very fast and spent most of his time reading. So that made him a very intellectual and philosophical person, even though he didn't have a college education. My mother had all this education, but she was sort of a doer and not deep a thinker. So in her family, ladies didn't smoke or drink or cuss or swim in swimming pools that men swam in. That's how conservative her background was. My father's conservative Methodist background from Hyde Park neighborhood in Austin was not a whole lot more progressive. So they joined the Episcopal Church. And that makes me a cradle Episcopalian, because in the Episcopal Church, you don't really have to believe in God in that born-again way. Just a casual interest is acceptable. You might come around. And drinking is not discouraged, and it's okay to be rich. So I was raised in the Episcopal Church in a predominantly black neighborhood in the city of Houston. I would have entered an all-black high school, but to protect me from racial integration, which was against the law, I was bused across town to go to a predominantly white school at a time that most of the people in my neighborhood were black. Because of the expansion of inner Houston, property values near town went down. We didn't have a lot of money, couldn't move, couldn't afford to move, didn't that much want to move, and so I was raised in a predominantly black neighborhood, but bused across town to go to white schools. And that may have something to do with my issues with authority figures. Also, I was real short. There was never a girl taller than me in my class until I entered the 11th grade in high school. And so I was too smart and too short to be good, and that made me a bad boy. My first trial, I was in kindergarten. We had a rock throwing competition most days at lunch, and one day I was too successful, and I hit this kid and he started bleeding. And they had a trial in the class, and the students voted whether to send me to the principal. And they gave me probation. So having been given the benefit of a jury verdict at age 5, I have great belief and admiration for letting ordinary people make decisions. And I didn't do much better going through elementary school and getting caught smoking in high school. And I was in high school in the 9th grade, and they owed me 5 swats. And over the summer, the school was changed so it would be the Houston Vocational School that would have one section for college-bound people. And my parents said, well, that school's closer. Do you want to go there? Do you want to go across town to Lamar? And I thought, well, that assistant principal says I'm going to get my 5 squats the first day back. I think I'll take the transfer. And that was how I wound up going to the all-white, relatively high-class Lamar High School that had 2 Jewish students and 1 Latin American student and a bunch of kids from River Oaks. So I went off to college because I had a variety of short people's skills. I was a diver and a gymnast and a cheerleader. You could do that if you're short. And we had a really good debate program. So I had the achievement, as nearly as I can tell, of having the lowest high school rank or average of any public school person that went off to my Ivy League school. And I had a good time there. And joined a fraternity and all that stuff. And the people in my little group were very ambitious. And in a fraternity, you often have a big brother and a little brother. My big brother was Angus King, who's now United States Senator as an independent for the state of Maine.
Wow.
And my little brother was the most powerful person I met. He's 4 feet 11 inches tall. His name is Robert Reich. He was the United States Secretary of Labor. He's often a pundit on national television. And we had another guy who became the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky and ran against Mitch McConnell and did not win to be elevated to the United States Senate. So I got a little taste of people of ambition and the idea that individuals could maybe make a difference. And went off to the University of Texas Law School on the plan that I would go through in 27 months because I was in a hurry. And so to do that, you enter school in the summer section, and if you go 2 full years and 3 summers, you could get a UT law degree. And I calculated that on that basis I would be a lawyer when I was 23 years old. Furthermore, I would be able to hide out from the draft, and they might get rid of this terrible war in Vietnam. You know, it's hard to find a large number of people that support the war in Vietnam anymore. You find people that admire and respect the people that served because they were obedient to their country's orders and did what they were called on to do. But you find very people that support the war. After all, they were not invading our country. And my plan kind of fell apart because after 1 year of law school, they abolished the deferment for graduate students, and I got a low draft number. And my roommate had an uncle who was in the reserves, and suddenly 50 places opened in a civil affairs unit in San Antonio, Texas, and we'd rolled down and enlisted in a unit that had not enlisted anybody for 4 years. And I am sure that some nice Hispanic young men from San Antonio died in combat in Vietnam so that we law students could ride it out in the Army Reserves at a time that the reserves were not called up to active duty. So I got out of law school and had a job waiting for my bar results, but I passed the bar and quit the job on the same day and found myself unemployed. And what I knew was, others had told me, you could go to the courthouse and ask for a court appointment, and that would be good for $50. And at the time I was living in an $85 a month apartment in which it was a duplex and we shared the rent 4 ways. So $50 a day sounded like a lot of money. I made $400 on appointments my first month, $1,500 the second month, and I thought, this is good. And I have never been anything but an unemployed full-time criminal defense lawyer. I never had a job as an attorney, ever. Never prosecuted, never did anything but defend people in trouble.
That's amazing. I probably don't know anybody that's in our business that could say that.
So that's how I got into the law business.
Good. That's wonderful. So you kind of like I guess, just got in the law business because that's what was there to do at the time.
Well, possession of a marijuana cigarette was 2 to life.
Yeah.
And I knew people that I'd gone to law school with that I would see smoking dope in Austin, Texas on the weekends, listening to Shiva's Headband and things like that, and they became assistant district attorneys for Harris County, Texas. And I thought that was just really rank hypocrisy. And I knew people that didn't want to serve in that war, and in a variety of ways they needed lawyers. And we called it the movement. It stood for a lot of things. At some point, Martin Luther King came around to the idea that it was an issue for black people, since black people were most of the infantry and most of the human cannon fodder being shot up over there. So the movement had a lot to do with reforming the way the country was working, and one way you could participate in it was as a lawyer. The pill was around. The slang was that girls said yes to men who said no. There was a whole lifestyle built around this, coupled on the other side with a paranoid fear of long hair and beards and all of that, whereas today you see a guy with a long hair and a beard, and he could be Donald Trump, he could be Mitch McConnell. You never know. But in the early 70s in the city of Houston, you kind of did have a choice about which side of the issue you were going to be on. And it was a lifestyle choice as well as an employment vocational choice. And so that was my choice. And somewhere in there I was told they were organizing the criminal defense lawyers and it would be just like a union. Well, coming out of my parents' background, that sounded pretty good, joining a union of lawyers in private practice. And together we might be able to help ourselves and help our clients and so forth. I did not attend the first meeting of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association because I didn't know anything about it and I wasn't invited. But I think I probably joined TCDLA in about 73. I know that I attended the first advanced criminal law course at Southern Methodist University when we stayed in the dormitories at SMU and had roommates, and 50 people attended classes and heard lectures. And so I would say that I got involved in TCDLA at the first opportunity. And along the way, I probably was a part of most every committee that I could think of or could find to be a part of, because I kind of philosophically believed in working way around the rim like basketball players do, not just doing one thing. Somewhere in there, I got to be president of the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, and 10 years after that was president of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and almost exactly 10 years after that was president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. When I became president of TCDLA, we had about 800, 900 members. We had gone down some in the previous couple of years. And when I finished my presidency, we had 12 or 1,300. And I thought, man, this is a great group. So where are we now? 3,500 people, 900 people in a room, not 50 people in a room. Staff of 17, not a staff of 2 or 3. I mean, it's done great. And it's not done great because of me. It's done great because it's a great idea. And I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Well, we all are. And we're happy that you have been a part of it and still are. What about some memorable cases or experiences or things that have popped up? Maybe some crazy, maybe not so crazy, maybe actually bad things that happen.
Well, when I started practicing law, I met a man, Bill Kilgarlin, now deceased. He later became a Supreme Court judge, but at the time he was in his 40s in Houston, and he had been a college debate person, and his partner in college became my high school debate coach. Somehow or other, I got connected up with Kilgarlin, and we tried 3 jury trials together. You always want to remember the ones that you win, so that cuts it down to one that's really important. We represented a young man named Joe Uresti who was accused of burglarizing a house and finding a single girl there alone and leaving her dead with something, a weapon stuck in her body. And the trial came down on whether they could prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. For a variety of reasons, we couldn't put him on, but they had a circumstantial case and no more. And the prosecutor got kind of confused because he thought that they were going to be able to introduce an oral confession through another assistant district attorney that had interviewed Mr. Uresti. And that assistant district attorney thought that they had a written confession, and so he couldn't remember his arrestee saying anything to him that led to the discovery of evidence. And since his taking of the oral statement was not admissible. Well, end of the day, three things happened. One, your arrestee was found not guilty. And that showed me that with a jury, just about anything can happen, no matter how horrible the crime, even for a defendant that doesn't testify. Another thing was that your arrestee was then on juvenile probation, and they could have locked him up and kept him for a little while and figured out what to do about him, whether he had a mental health problem that was treatable with medication or in some other way, what was going on with him, because they really believed he had done it. But they didn't pay attention. The prosecutors were so upset about the acquittal, they stormed out of the courtroom. The judge came out and started criticizing the jury. The prosecutors were not even in the room. He told Mr. Uresti he could go, and he went. And he was found about a year and a half later committing a burglary and was arrested for it. And so far as I know, there was no injury to human life coming out of that. And so I thought, boy, prosecutors ought to know to keep their eye on the ball, and if things don't work out, they may have other remedies, which we now know often happens. So that if you beat the government, for example, in a federal case, watch out, you have a tax investigation coming right behind it. But the Uresti case kind of made an impression on me for a variety of reasons. Then, somewhere along the way, I got connected up with this defending marijuana cases, and I got referred a case in San Antonio involving an airplane load of marijuana. Came to San Antonio and met Jerry Goldstein for the first time. He was 26, 27, had an 18-year-old wife, scandalous, living out in the country, a giant dog. I came down with Larry Sauer. He invited us to stay with him, and we had an acquaintance that has led to our trying more than a dozen jury cases together, at least half that many appeals. So with Jerry, I've had some really exciting times. Sometimes the case would come to me and I'd bring him in, sometimes the other way, sometimes just a coincidence. In the largest single seizure of marijuana that I know about, this is a marijuana boat with 110,000 pounds on it, seized at a dock in Freeport, Texas. There were 30 people arrested. And most of your criminal defense lawyers in Houston got involved. Jerry got involved because Jerry gets involved whenever there's a big case, and a couple of other out-of-town lawyers. And everybody stood up. These defendants got T-shirts that said, "Nobody talks, everybody walks." And a great federal judge didn't want to try 30 people, so he divided us up into heats of 6 people per group, 5 groups of 6. And they started trying them. The government's theory was that they would try the first case, and they'd all get convicted and get severe sentences, and everybody else then could work out pleas. But in that case, there were 2 acquittals and 2 convictions and a guy that split the verdict in half, and that emboldened the defendants. Well, by the time we got to group 6, which was our group, we had the eyewitnesses to their circumstantial evidence on the record in numerous conflicts. And for our case alone, the jury acquitted or convicted every defendant. The judge said, "I'm not doing this again." And we went and talked to the U.S. attorney, and he agreed to recommend probation for 6 defendants who may have been guilty of a conspiracy to receive and distribute 110,000 pounds of marijuana. If the law were today as it was, if the law were then as it is today, they would still be in jail. As it happens, none of them ever went to jail. We got bond on that case within 3 or 4 days. They got probation, they survived the probation and moved on with their life. So I am not a believer in severe punishment, really, for anybody, for any nonviolent, victimless type crime. But that's the case that I kind of like with the Uresti case. And then a few years later, Roger DeGarmo, nicknamed the Animal DeGarmo, was tried and convicted of capital murder in Fort Bend County. And at his trial, he told the jurors, "You should give me the death penalty, and I'll make it easy for you. If you don't give me the death penalty, I will get out again someday, and if I do, I will kill each of you. And if you were gone, I will kill the surviving members of your family." Well, in his trial, the jury accommodated him pretty quickly and gave him the death penalty. Greg Gladden, who will be here, and his brother got an award today from TCDLA. Greg handled the writ and showed there was prosecutorial perjury and suppression of potentially helpful evidence and won a new trial. So Greg asked if I would take the appointment and do the retrial with him. He said we might have a problem. They're going to bring some of those jurors back in to testify in the second trial. Well, you know, Roger was brain damaged. We were allowed by the court to do photo emissions, tomography, to determine whether there was any residual effect of a documented injury to the head when he was 18 years old, changing a tire on a Peterbilt 18-wheeler, and the wheel blew into his head and knocked him out for 4 days. Because before that, he was not in any serious delinquent problems, and after that, he was a wild, dangerous, and violent man. So we transformed the trial as best we could into a discussion of free will and predestination and moral fault and inevitable consequences. And our jury gave him life. So Greg and I periodically get together and celebrate the fact that Roger DeGarmo is still alive. He's in his 70s. He's in prison. He's found Jesus. And he's trusted enough by the administrators of the Department of Criminal Justice that he is with a small group taken from one unit to another to witness for salvation through belief in the love of Jesus Christ. So I don't really believe in the death penalty either, because I do believe the maxim that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done in their life. And as a person raised as a cradle Episcopalian, I believe something about the redemptive ability of the human spirit. So that's some cases.
What about, just in general, I was listening to you here, some general comments about the changes in the judiciary and the way they sentence and how they treat us. I know that's a broad...
Oh, man, I am so old school.
Yeah.
When in state court, your felonies were either 2 to life or 5 to life, the jury really could do the right thing. Now, we have the best criminal defense lawyers in America located in Texas, without doubt, the best criminal defense bar. Speaking as a past president of the National Association, the best criminal lawyers come out of Texas. And the reason is that, at least old school, we got a chance to try every case twice. You do your jury selection questions on range of punishment as well as on theories of not guilty. And you would know going in that you were trying the case not only with the hope of winning, but understanding that you might lose. We've all heard the expression, a long, slow guilty plea, but we know that you might, with the jury, beat the offer. And the offer would be negotiated against what's going to happen if the jury finds him guilty. We still have some room for that. But we've given in state court tools to judges, like the ability to lock somebody up for 6 months and cripple them with almost impossible to satisfy conditions of community supervision and so forth. So we've reduced the number of cases that are tried as punishment-only cases. And I don't like that. I think that the legislature showing a mistrust in judges and taking that away was done without a great deal of thought or experience. And I liked it the way it was before. In federal court, I remember when most cases were a 5-year maximum or a 15-year maximum per count, and you had the Youth Corrections Act. And while you didn't have jury sentencing, neither did you have sentencing guidelines. And sometimes that would work in your favor because some judges believed in giving a first offender a second chance, and sometimes it did not work in your favor because for some judges, I think the guidelines tend to put a ceiling on their sentence and cause them to give a little less than they might like to give. But nevertheless, I do not like the sentencing by the numbers that we have had since, I think, October 1987. And I still remember a time when judges were not afraid of judging and thought it was their responsibility to determine, considering all the factors, what was an appropriate result. And then we went through a time when a large number of new federal judges were appointed by President Reagan and then President Bush, principally out of civil firms. And I think that they were people who didn't know much about crime and punishment, who'd gone to the best colleges and the best law schools and worked in white-shoe law firms and didn't have much information about the experiences that happened to real people that get dirt under their fingernails, and that these guidelines eliminate their fear of judging by giving them some quasi-scientific reference book they can go to and assign numbers to human conduct. And I don't like that, and that's the change. And I have said to people from time to time, not entirely in jest, that they changed the rules on me about halfway through my career. And I liked the rules when I started. The best lawyers, the lawyers that were the most imaginative, the most creative, the most industrious, prepared the best, researched the best, worked the hardest, got the better results over any group of cases where the jury did the sentencing. And they largely took that away from us. And then with the guidelines, largely the prosecutor gets to dictate the outcome. And I don't like that. And so those are two changes. And if those had been the rules when I came out of law school, I might not have found this quite so attractive. Although my friends in other areas tell me, well, yeah, you'd like to sue people for money, but let me tell you about tort reform. You'd like to represent injured people, but, they changed their workmen's compensation law. So, maybe it's still best over here. It's where I'm most comfortable anyway.
What are your comments or opinions about appointed or elected judges? Which is better, if there is one better?
Well, there really isn't. I mean, it's an adversary system of justice, and generally the judge is the adversary. I thought it was unfortunate when I was a young lawyer and I realized that the rule was that a judge will follow the law, and follow the law means he will rule for the prosecution unless ruling for the prosecution convinces him it's reversible error. That's the real standard in the courts. And I've kind of come to accept that following the law means that the judge is a prosecutor and he should rule for the prosecution unless he will surely be reversed. And as the appellate courts have become more conservative, the trial judges have become more conservative. And that's institutional, whether they're appointed or not. When I started as a lawyer, we didn't really elect judges. In Harris County, there would be a vacancy. And the governor, who was a conservative Democrat, would appoint someone to fill the vacancy. And that person would run unopposed. So our system of electing judges in Harris County really was an appointed system in the first part of my career. Then all the conservatives moved over to the Republican Party. And that became a majority in Harris County. And they would run for election, and if they won in the primary, they could be elected. Now we have 22 district courts in Harris County. That's courts that can send people to prison or to be executed, and 19 of them are women. 20 of the 22 are former prosecutors. So that's your elected judge system, and yet your appointed judge system was the governor appointing people that he knew. So what I have no experience with is this so-called commission system and trying to have judges selected by third parties, groups of lawyers. Who appoints those groups? I was on a group once appointed to interview and select and recommend new United States federal magistrate judges to the Southern District of Texas. And we were told that whoever we recommended would surely be appointed. And I was on that committee. And I wasn't on that committee long before the chair of the committee told me who the favorites of the judges were that we were supposed to select. So I don't know. I figure the commission system will be just as politicized as everything else.
I was going to talk to you. So you've told us that you've been self-employed, but have you had your own firm, or how have you done
When I started seeking appointments after getting my bar results in the fall of 1970, I ran into a couple of guys that were VISTA volunteers. That's volunteers in service to America, getting a fairly low salary but a draft deferment, providing legal services to the poor. And the government provided a very, very small amount of money to any nonprofit organization that would sponsor them. So we set up a nonprofit organization, Harris County Legal Assistance Incorporated. We rented some office space in a very, very decrepit building downtown. There was a radio station on the second floor, public radio, KPFT radio on the second floor. The space was about the size of the room we're in, maybe 80 feet by 40 feet, and high ceilings like this because it had been a warehouse. So in trade for legal fees, we got carpenter clients to build partitions halfway to the ceiling, which meant that you could only have a private conversation by whispering or meeting in the bar across the street. And we call ourselves the Prairie Law Collective. And anyone who showed up in Houston with nowhere to go but had a law degree and a bar admission could come in. And we had several people come through. I remember Larry Sauer walking in and saying, "My name's Larry Sauer. I'm from Houston. I just passed the bar, and I was told you might be a place that I could go to work." And I said, "What's with that Marine haircut?" And he said, "Yes, I'm in the Marine Reserves. I have to keep this haircut. But I assure you, as soon as I get out of my reserve obligation, the haircuts will stop." Well, now, 30 some odd years later, Larry Sauer remains one of my dearest friends, and he has the longest hair in criminal defense, a ponytail that goes almost to his waist.
That's right. Yeah.
And he has a website, austindruglawyer.com. So we ran that until about 73, and then I kind of wanted to have a little bit more formality. I wanted to have a library, and I didn't want to have an ideological dispute with a free secretary. And I thought maybe the money had gotten good enough I could make it on my own. I met a great man, Jim Poppy, who was kind of coming the other direction. He had started out in a Wall Street law firm. Then he got a job representing his best friend for draft evasion. And then he started doing criminal cases, came to Houston with a small firm, and he really liked the criminal law. So we ran a law firm from 72 to 78 and remained good friends, but Jim was from a small town and wanted to live in a small town. So when he moved, I got with Eric Nelson, who was a labor lawyer. And the Nelson and Mallet firm ran for about 8 or 10 years, and we had different people coming and going. It was the same basic expense sharing arrangement, but in a real office. And today, as we sit here, the office that I personally designed and lived in Houston from 1978 to the late 80s is occupied by a very good friend and fine attorney, the Honorable Craig Washington. He is in my old office sitting there in Houston, Texas. It amuses me to think of that. And Eric Nelson and I remained good friends, but a time came when, as happens with small arrangements, our interests tended to diverge instead of converge. And so I moved on with Gary Trichter and Daniel Wanamaker, and pretty soon and shortly Sheldon Weisfeld, and my partner for the last 25 years, Gus Saper. And so I practiced law at yet another address with a kind of a series of names for about another few years, and then Gus and I moved into a expense sharing arrangement with an established plaintiff's firm in Houston called Mandel and Wright. And we thought it was cool to be in a firm that had been founded by two Jewish liberal longshoremen lawyers representing black longshoremen. Although Mr. Mandel and Mr. Wright were gone, they had been friends of my parents. And the firm kept the name even after the founding partners deceased. But about 6 or 8 years there, and again, interests diverged, and Gus and I moved and have been sharing offices as Mallet Saper, and in the last few years, Mallet Saper Burb since then. So that's kind of the arrangements. And what pleases me is that with maybe one, possibly two exceptions, I'm on really, really good terms and a really close friend, with all the people that I ever practiced law with.
That's
Also,
amazing.
somewhere in there,
Yeah.
I met this exotic, tall, young, and I say young, I mean 12 years younger than me, and I'm in my early 30s, woman in San Antonio. And time passed, we got married, and Teresa and I have now been married for 34 years. And our son David, who is not exactly like me, he's 6'2", going on 6'3". David worked for us in my office in the summers, and having been exposed to that experience, he decided that he would move down the road opened by his Game Boys and World of Warcraft and all of that. And he's an honors graduate of the University of Texas, writing computer software code in Austin, Texas.
That's great.
So that's kind of
no idea about that.
That's
great.
my personal life coming around. And he is a metal guy, but when you do computers, by that I mean he likes metal music. That means music without any horns or piano. It is hard, grunge, loud, angry stuff. But a computer guy, at least where he's working, has to be able to write code 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So he is a sober, metal head, 25-year-old with a full red beard, living in Austin. He looks like a Viking, and I guess I'm real proud of him. Not like me in any way.
That is truly amazing. I think amazing is thrown around too much, but that is amazing. Well, we're getting close to the end here, but while you've talked, I'd like to ask you what your observations and concerns of the Tea Party are, and why do you think they're so popular in Texas?
Oh, I don't think they are. I think it's a passing thing. I'm so happy about this Donald Trump phenomenon because I think that Fox News and Hannity and the people that said when Obama was elected president, we must do everything we can in the Senate and the House of Representatives to oppose everything that he proposes. I think that you reap what you sow. And I am cautiously optimistic that this fall the Democrats will take back the House and the Senate and retain the presidency. And it's a critical time for the appointment not only as judges on the Supreme Court, but as those Reagan appointees become more mature in the trial courts and the courts of appeal. I think we have some possibility in my lifetime of having a bench that returns to the kind of progressive thought that the Fifth Circuit had when they desegregated the schools and approved the Civil Rights Act and created a lot of good throughout the South particularly, but also other courts did that in other parts of the country. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the consequences of asking for too much will be they will, as we say, walk on thorns falling from the tree that they planted, and that this is going to be a good year. Not that the Democrats will carry Texas or the presidency, but I think they will carry the bench in Harris County and Dallas County and Travis County and maybe some other counties around the state.
Well, of course, we wholeheartedly agree, and we shall see.
We shall see.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.